The day my daughter turned 44, I bought her a lemon cake from the bakery on Elm Street because that had always been her favorite since she was small. Yellow frosting, little sugar flowers on top. She used to pick them off one by one and eat them before she touched the actual cake. I remember thinking, as I carried that box through the parking lot, that some things don't change no matter how old your kids get. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things that year. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Medford, Oregon, and I own a house that my late wife Carolyn and I bought in 1994 for $212,000. It's worth considerably more than that now. It's also the place where we brought our daughter home from the hospital, where we painted the kitchen 3 different shades of yellow before we agreed on the right one, where Carolyn spent her last 6 months sitting by the back window watching the bird feeders. I'm telling you all of this because you need to understand what that house means to me before I tell you what my daughter tried to do with it. Her name is Angela. She's a paralegal, works for a firm in Portland that handles estate planning and probate. Smart woman. Organized. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's way of folding her hands when she's waiting for you to finish talking so she can tell you what she actually thinks. After Carolyn passed in 2021, Angela started coming around more. At first, I thought it was grief. Her grief, maybe mine. We'd eat dinner together on Sundays most weeks, and she'd help me sort through her mother's things, and sometimes we'd just sit on the porch and not say much at all. I was grateful for that. A man gets quiet and hollow after 40 years with someone, and having family close helps fill some of the space. Then she started bringing up the paperwork. It started small. She mentioned that I should have a proper will, that Carolyn's passing had shown us how complicated things could get without the right documents in order. She was not wrong about that. We had fumbled through probate for months because Carolyn's name was on accounts I hadn't thought about, and it was exhausting and expensive. So when Angela said I should let her help me get everything organized, I nodded and said yes. That sounds sensible. She was, after all, the professional. She did this for a living. The first document was a standard will. She drafted it through her firm, brought it over one Sunday evening, explained it clearly, I signed. Then came a healthcare directive, then a durable power of attorney for financial matters, which she explained was standard for someone my age, in case I ever became incapacitated. She used her coworker's name as the notary, came by on a Tuesday afternoon, and I signed that too. Looking back, I can see exactly where I handed her the keys to everything I owned. But in the moment, I didn't see it that way. She was my daughter. She was a professional. She used words I half understood and explained them in ways that made me feel like I was being responsible, not reckless. What I didn't know was that the power of attorney she'd had me sign was broader than she described. It didn't just give her authority to act on my behalf if I became incapacitated. It gave her authority to act on my behalf, period, with very few restrictions. I only found that out later. She also, I would eventually learn, had started a paper trail. Over the following year, she had quietly obtained a letter from a physician, not my doctor, a doctor I had seen once for a second opinion on a knee issue, suggesting I had shown early signs of mild cognitive impairment. I have since learned that the note was, at best, a dramatic overstatement of a single conversation about whether I sometimes felt disoriented after waking. At worst, it was manufactured to serve a purpose. I was never told this note existed. It sat in a file Angela controlled, waiting. My son-in-law is named Owen. He and Angela have been married for 11 years. He's a quiet man, works in logistics, coaches youth soccer on weekends. I'd always liked him without really knowing him well. He was the kind of person who fixes things around the house when he visits without being asked, who always refills your coffee before he refills his own. I took his quietness for contentment. I did not know, until the night he sat next to me at Angela's birthday dinner and pressed his phone into my hand under the table, that he had been quietly sick with worry for months. The birthday dinner was at their house in Portland. Angela had cooked, which was unusual. She normally ordered in, and there were maybe 10 people around the table. Friends of hers, a couple from the neighborhood, her coworker Bree, who I'd met once before. It was a Friday evening in March, still cold enough that the windows had fog slightly from the warmth inside. I was sitting between Owen and Bree. We were midway through the main course, some kind of roasted chicken with root vegetables, and the conversation was easy and light. Someone was telling a story about a road trip that had gone wrong. People were laughing. Owen had barely touched his food. I noticed that. He kept turning his wine glass in slow circles on the tablecloth. Then he leaned close to me, close enough that I could hear him clearly without anyone else catching it, and he said very quietly, "I need you to read something." He slid his phone into my hand under the edge of the table. I looked down at the screen. It was an email thread. The most recent message was from a real estate attorney addressed to Angela, dated 4 days earlier. The subject line was Listing Timeline, 4218 Birchwood Court. That's my address. The email referenced a signed authorization. It referenced a power of attorney document. It discussed a proposed listing date in late April and noted that given the circumstances, and here it used the phrase, the principal's documented diminished capacity, the process should move forward without delay. I read it twice. My hands did not shake. I don't know why. Some part of my brain seemed to understand the shaking would give something away. I set the phone back in my lap and looked across the table at my daughter, who was laughing at something, leaning forward with her glass raised, looking easy and happy and completely at home in her own kitchen. Owen reached over and took his phone back without looking at me directly. He said, just barely above a whisper, "Don't say anything tonight. Please, we'll talk tomorrow." I looked back at my plate. I thought about the lemon cake I had bought that morning, the yellow frosting, the little sugar flowers she used to pick off one by one. I picked up my fork and finished my dinner. I do not know how I did that. I am not a man who has ever been good at hiding what I feel. Carolyn used to say I wore every thought on my face like a bulletin board, but something settled into me that night that I can only describe as cold clarity. Not anger, not grief, not even shock exactly. Just a very still, very quiet understanding that something was ending and something else was beginning, and that what I did in the next few hours would matter enormously. After dinner, I said I was tired and that I'd make the drive back to Medford. Angela hugged me at the door and said to drive safe. Owen walked me to my car, and when we were in the driveway out of earshot, he said quickly, "I found it by accident. She left her laptop open. I've seen other things. Phone calls she takes outside. Documents in a folder she password protected on her work drive. I didn't know what to do. I still don't." He looked genuinely wrecked. "She's my wife." "But you're not. This isn't right." I told him I understood. I told him I didn't blame him for waiting as long as he had. I asked him to send me the email, the thread, everything he could access, and to do it from his personal account, not anything shared. He nodded. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't come back from because he was. I drove home. It was raining, the kind of Pacific Northwest drizzle that isn't quite rain and isn't quite mist, just a general dampness that gets into everything. I turned on the radio and then turned it off again. I needed the quiet. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Carolyn and I had eaten breakfast every day for 27 years, and I opened my laptop. First thing I did was log in to my bank. Angela had been handling the bill payments and had the login information. I'd never thought twice about that. What I saw when I logged in was that my checking account, which should have held roughly $32,000, held $4,000 and change. My savings account, which I kept for emergencies and then built up to just under $60,000 over the last several years, held $19. I'm going to let that sit for a moment because I want you to understand what that felt like. I'm a retired teacher. My pension is modest, a little over $3,100 a month. I have Social Security on top of that, which brings me to about $4,400 a month total. That's enough to live on comfortably in Medford, where property taxes and utilities are manageable, but it is not enough to absorb the loss of nearly $90,000 without consequences, and it was certainly not enough to rebuild those savings quickly, not at 68. More than that, and this is the part that hit me harder than the numbers, those accounts represented Carolyn's life insurance payout. When she died, the policy paid out $85,000. I had not spent much of it. It had felt wrong to spend it, and had felt, in some way I couldn't quite articulate, like the last tangible presence of her in my life. Angela had moved it, piece by piece, over the course of about 14 months, in amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic bank alerts. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark kitchen for a while. Then I got up, made coffee, and started writing down everything I could remember. I called a lawyer the next morning, not Angela's firm, a different attorney, a woman named Kathleen who had been recommended to me by a former colleague who focused on elder law and financial exploitation cases. I told her everything in a 2-hour phone call, and she listened without interrupting except to ask clarifying questions. When I finished, she said, "I want you to do nothing until we speak in person. Don't call Angela, don't move money, don't let on that you know. Can you do that?" I said I didn't know. She said, "I need you to try." I tried. I managed 3 days. Those 3 days were the strangest of my life. Angela called me on Saturday, cheerful, talking about whether I'd enjoyed the party, mentioning offhandedly that she'd been thinking we should talk about the house situation soon. I told her that sounded fine and that I was just tired from the drive. She said she'd call later in the week. I said, "Sounds good." We hung up. I took Kathleen every document I had. Owen emailed me the full thread and everything else he'd been able to find. Screenshots of calendar entries. A PDF he'd recovered from a shared printer that appeared to be a draft memo to the real estate attorney outlining a timeline for transitioning the principal to managed care. That phrase, the principal, referring to me in a document drafted by my daughter, describing her plan to sell my home and put me in a facility. Kathleen's office forwarded the material to the Oregon Department of Justice's Financial Fraud Unit. She also contacted the state bar, because the physician who had written the cognitive impairment letter turned out to have a prior complaint on his license related to documentation irregularities, and the letter Angela had used appeared to have been commissioned specifically for this purpose, outside any standard clinical process. On a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later, I was sitting on my back porch drinking coffee when Kathleen called to tell me that Angela had been brought in for questioning the previous afternoon. The real estate transaction had been frozen. The power of attorney had been formally challenged and suspended pending investigation. And based on the financial records, investigators had identified a total of $87,430 transferred out of my accounts over 14 months. Angela called me that evening. It was the first time I had heard her voice since I had known everything. She did not confess. She did not apologize. She said she didn't understand what was happening, that there had been a misunderstanding, that she had been trying to help me, and that some of the financial management she'd done had been for my benefit, that I was confused about the details. That word, confused. I said, "I'm not confused, Angela." There was a long silence. Then she said, "Daddy." I said, "Don't." I hung up. "I'm not going to tell you that was easy. I am not going to pretend that the grief of that moment was any less real than the grief of losing Carolyn, because in some ways it was the same species of loss. You love someone your entire life. You carry them in your body. You drive through the rain to buy them lemon cake with yellow frosting. And then you learn that they looked at your house, your savings, the money from your dead wife's life insurance policy, and they saw a transaction. That is not a small thing to hold. Angela was charged with financial elder abuse, unauthorized use of a power of attorney, and fraud in the 3rd degree. She surrendered her paralegal certification, pending the outcome. The physician who wrote the letter was referred for a disciplinary review. She pleaded guilty to the financial elder abuse charge and received a sentence of 30 months in a correctional facility, along with 5 years of probation and a restitution order for the full amount. The restitution will take years to pay back. I have accepted that I may not live to see all of it. What I got back more quickly was the money that had been moved to a holding account rather than spent, about $41,000, frozen and returned. The remainder is on a payment schedule. I still have my house. My house is still the place where Carolyn and I painted the kitchen 3 different shades of yellow. The bird feeders are still out back. On quiet mornings, I still sit on the porch with coffee and watch the birds, and sometimes I think about her sitting by the window in those last months, and it doesn't feel as sharp as it used to. Owen filed for divorce 3 months after the guilty plea. He came and told me in person, on a Sunday afternoon, stood in the driveway with his hands in his jacket pockets. He said he was sorry for not coming to me sooner. I told him that without him I would have walked into that April with my house sold out from under me and no recourse, and that I would never not be grateful to him for that. He nodded and looked at the ground, and I could see he was trying not to cry. We shook hands. He said he'd keep in touch. I hope he does. The thing I've been asked most, since this became a story I tell, is how I didn't see it coming. And the honest answer is that I did see things in pieces, and I chose to explain them away because explaining them away was so much easier than the alternative. The late-night phone call she took outside, the way she pivoted the conversation whenever I asked specific questions about accounts, the time I asked her to print a statement for me and she brought it already folded, already sorted, and I just took it from her hand, without looking closely, because she was my daughter. And what would be the point of looking closely? I signed documents without reading them in full. I gave access because it felt like closeness. I let her manage things because after Carolyn died, I was tired in a way that went all the way down, and she was there, and she was capable, and I trusted her. None of that is stupidity. I want to say that plainly. Being tired and grieving and trusting the wrong person is not stupidity. It is being human. But it cost me, and I want anyone listening to this to hear that the lesson is not, don't trust your family. The lesson is, keep your own eyes on your own accounts. Keep your own copy of every document you sign. Read things before you sign them, even when the person handing them to you loves you or is supposed to. I now have a fee-only financial advisor named Doug, who I found through the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, a real human being with no product to sell me, who looks at my accounts monthly and flags anything that doesn't fit the pattern. I changed all my banking passwords. The power of attorney document was revoked and a new one I had Kathleen review line by line, has been prepared, naming a different person. I am 68 years old. I wake up in my own house. I make my own coffee. I make my own decisions, even the small inconsequential ones, and I take the results of those decisions, good and bad, without handing them off to anyone else. My pension arrives on the 1st of every month. I watch it hit the account. I'm still here. That is the whole story. That is the only story that matters. I've thought a lot about the word trust since all of this happened, not in any grand philosophical sense, just the ordinary daily kind of trust. The kind where you hand someone your coffee cup and they refill it without being asked. The kind where you sign a piece of paper because the person holding it out to you is someone you raised. That kind of trust is not a weakness. I want to be clear about that. People will sometimes try to tell you that getting deceived means you were naive, that you should have known better, that a smarter person would have seen the signs. Maybe. But I've come to believe that the problem was never my trust. The problem was what Angela chose to do with it. Those are two entirely different things, and it matters which one you blame. What I keep coming back to is cause and effect, not as punishment, not as some cosmic balancing act, but as plain mechanics. Every choice has a weight to it, and over time that weight lands somewhere. Angela spent 14 months making small, careful, deliberate choices, each one a little further past the line than the one before it, moving $2,000, then $5,000. Then, using a power of attorney document she had explained to me in softened language on a Sunday evening while I nodded and trusted her. Each choice built on the last. And eventually the whole structure of what she'd done had to hold its own weight, and it couldn't. Owen saw an email on an open laptop. That's all it took. One moment of carelessness after 14 months of precision, and the entire thing came apart. That's not luck. That's the nature of things built on dishonesty. They require constant maintenance, and eventually you miss a step. Owen made a different set of choices. He sat with something unbearable. Suspicion about his own wife, loyalty pulling in two directions, and he chose the harder thing. Not immediately. He waited longer than he wishes he had, and I think that will stay with him for a long time. But when he acted with integrity, and because of that I still have my home. I still have Carolyn's money. or what's left to be recovered. I still have the bird feeders out back. What I learned about myself through all of this is that grief had made me careless in a way I hadn't recognized. After Carolyn died, I just wanted someone to handle things. I wanted to hand off the weight of the details to someone who loved me. And I stopped looking closely because looking closely felt like distrust, and distrust felt like loneliness. That's the thing about being a person who values closeness. The people who want to take advantage of you will use that exact quality against you. They'll frame access as love and oversight as insult. The intelligence I should have used wasn't anything complicated. It was just the ordinary attentiveness I would have applied to anything else in my life. Read the document, check the account, ask the follow-up question. Not because I suspected anything, but because those things were mine and I was responsible for them. I'm 68. I'm still learning what I'm responsible for. I think that's the way it works. You don't stop learning that just because you're past some age people have decided is the finish line for growth. Angela thought she knew what I was capable of. She thought she knew the shape of my grief and exactly how far it would carry her. She was wrong about that. I am still here.